I'm going to start sharing my screen and jump into the presentation now. For those of you who might not know me, my name is Jeriel Clark. I'm the organizing director with Western Colorado Alliance. I've had the opportunity to be on staff for like 4.5 years now, almost 5 if you count the contract work that I did during campaign season. And so I'm just really excited to be finally talking about deep canvassing. If you've sat in workshops with me even that long ago, I've been talking about deep canvassing in theory for quite a while, and I'm so excited that we get to talk about it in practice as an organization now. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. So this evening, we're going to do a nuts and bolts introduction to deep listening and deep canvassing, how our Alliance plans to use both tools in the next few years ahead. And by the close of the workshop, you all should have an in-depth understanding of why these tools are important and what they might look like in practice within our organization. So the bullets that we'll cover this evening is why deep canvassing, does it actually work? Is it effective? What is our Alliance's timeline with deep canvassing? And deep listening in practice and deep canvassing in practice. So the first thing that I want to highlight is we keep using these two words kind of interchangeably with each other, deep listening versus deep canvassing. So I just kind of want to pull that out a little bit. We're going to begin in our organization with deep listening. So deep listening is inherently a part of deep canvassing, but it's also sometimes a standalone tool, and that's where we're going to start. So as I talk about deep listening, when I get to the timeline, just know that that's something, deep canvassing is something that's going to come in our organization after we've done some deep listening. And the difference really is that we use deep listening to identify the issues we need to work on in our communities. And for us, we need to start a little further back than just diving into deep canvassing and picking issues that we think we need to work on. We need to instead spend time in deep conversation in our communities to understand exactly what those issues are that we should be working on. And then we can move into deep canvassing to move an issue on the ballot. So with that understanding, I'm going to come back to deep listening in a little bit, but really the meat of tonight is to tell you a little more about what deep canvassing is. And that is the meat in terms of my presentation to you. We're actually going to spend more time in conversation with each other and less time listening to me, which I'm really excited about. So the first thing that I just wanted to talk about was what are the different types of canvassing? So in a traditional canvas, and if you've done canvassing or door-to-door knocking, like just put a shout out or put in a reaction or, put yes, totally in the chat, however you want to respond. And if you've never done it, that's just fine too. The word canvassing is inherently scary to some people. Actually, I think it's inherently scary to everyone. And then we do it and some of us get hooked. There's really two types of traditional canvassing that I'm guessing many of you have engaged in. That's persuasion and GOTV. So a persuasion canvass is a target to swing voters. We are not sure if they're likely to support our issue, but we think they might be, and so we want to go talk to them. The canvasser delivers a message, the voter talks, but the canvasser talks more, and it's an average 3 to 5 minute message, and the canvasser identifies voters' likelihood to support an issue so they know whether or not to come back to that door once ballots have been mailed. During a Get Out the Vote canvas, it targets their base of supportive individuals who are eligible to vote and those voters who are persuaded on an issue or a candidate. The canvasser delivers a message and they ask for a commitment to form a voting plan. And so these conversations are 2 to 3 minutes. What is different about deep canvassing is that a deep canvas targets far outside the scope of registered, active, engaged, likely to turn out voters. It allows us to talk to youth. It allows us to talk to maybe undocumented folks in the community. It allows us to talk to perhaps former felons who don't even realize that they can re-register to vote. It allows us to talk to a whole community of people who are just like inherently neglected from the traditional canvassing style because the outcome and the goals aren't exactly the same. In a deep canvas, the canvasser asks questions, but the resident or the voter does more of the talking. The resident and voter describes their own perspectives. They engage in storytelling. They offer vulnerability to one another, and they often draw their own conclusions by being encouraged to think through their own situations. So let's dig into that a little bit. These conversations, the last thing I'll say, are 15, 20 minutes. They can be an hour. Deep canvassing can last a really long time because people are so desperate to be engaged and to feel validated and to be asked questions. And I'll actually come back to that in a minute. Okay, so some other ways that deep canvassing is different. We feel like deep canvassing is really transformational instead of transactional. We don't have a metric number outcome necessarily that we're trying to get to. Sometimes we just want to understand how our communities use language, or we might be trying to identify the top 5 most important issues. We're not trying to come away with a metric for success at the ballot necessarily, at least definitely when we first start. We have the opportunity to shift underlying feelings and attitudes that will change how people vote in a lasting way. And it helps residents and voters draw their own conclusion, sometimes in a different way than they originally thought, when they have the opportunity to be confronted with a prejudice that they might not have known that they had. It also aims to help people make new meaning in face of crisis and then act on that new meaning. So deep canvassing, more than anything else, has been proven, more than anything else in the canvassing world, I should say, has been proven to move people along various steps in the leadership journey. So it can move people from inaction to action to engagement, so that they can see their impact last longer. And then finally, deep canvassing requires us to build authentic relationships and reminds us that we have more in common with our fellow community members than we have in difference, because we spend so much time focusing on the differences and sometimes get lost in the ability to find the commonality. So just quickly, where did deep canvassing come from? Well, in 2008 in California, I don't know if y'all remember Proposition 8, but it was to ban gay marriage, which was legal in California at the time. And LGBTQ advocates were feeling good leading up to the election. 60% polled against voting for Prop 8, which would have banned gay marriage. 40% polled in favor. And so they were feeling pretty good in the LGBTQ ally world. And then come election day, what happened was 54% voted against LGBTQ organizations, or gay, they voted, I worded that a little bit silly. It actually should say 54% voted for Prop 8, which means it passed and gay marriage was suddenly illegal again in the state of California. And it really left LGBTQ individuals and families everywhere reeling, especially those who had campaigned against Proposition 8 to make sure that it wasn't going to happen. And one of those individuals who had participated, his name was David Fleischer, and he was with the Los Angeles LGBT Center Leadership Lab. And after this kind of amazing loss, he asked himself, well, I want to know why they voted against LGBTQ rights and why they voted for Prop 8. So he pulled together a team of volunteers, and he did something that a lot of folks haven't done before, and that is he didn't go knock the doors of the people who were likely persuadable or the people that he already knew he needed to just turn out and were pretty supportive. He went and tried to identify and knock the doors of folks who probably didn't support LGBTQ issues at this time, and he really wanted to know why they voted against it. And that's really how deep canvassing was born, was through this small group of volunteers who went out and asked questions. And the result was a change in mindsets, not all, but certainly many. And the misconception that arose, that what they understood was that based on the previous campaign, what voters had seen the LGBTQ community talking about was tax write-offs, special preferences. That's how they imagined why LGBTQ folks wanted gay marriage to be legal. And when they had a conversation at the door face to face, a gay man with someone who voted for Proposition 8, they were forced to confront an LGBTQ person or an ally, and their mindset began to shift more towards an understanding just through simple conversation and question asking. And what they started to realize was the commonalities they had was this wasn't about tax write-offs or special preferences. Gay marriage, the right to marry, was the right to marry whoever you loved and to protect the people that you cared most about. And as they started to engage in these 15 to 20 minute deeper conversations, the mindset of some of the voters who had originally voted for Prop 8 were breaking down into tears and feeling so ashamed of what they'd done in their vote. Not all, but some. I am not going to show you a video of a very specific deep canvassing moment that I've seen specifically around that, because I think we might see it on Saturday if you're joining for the annual conference. But I can say that there's video evidence of some of these particular conversations happening at the doors in California that are really powerful. Moving on though, like, what is this magic sauce and deep canvassing that makes it really different than traditional canvassing? And it's what we see here. It's empathy, validation, mirroring, and offering honesty and vulnerability. So building that rapport, really listening to be curious, repeating responses back that you're hearing, and then sharing your own story. So when we talk about mirroring or just responding back, that's active listening, that's deep listening, that's listening in a nutshell, is using friendly and non-judgmental tones, even when what that person is saying is really potentially offensive to maybe yourself or someone that you love or care for. And despite what they're saying, finding ways to relate and to connect to the resident or the voter as they share their story, and then mirroring their body language, letting them know that as they offer you vulnerability, you're offering yourself too. You're there, you're listening, you're an active participant. And not being afraid of the silence, letting it be a part of the conversation. And then echoing residents or voters' thoughts and feelings back to them to let them know that you were listening and you heard what they were saying. And then finally, not listening for your next point, but listening to hear what should be your next question. And that is deep canvassing, is what's your next question? Because beyond these bullet points, there's a need to constantly look for ways to dig deeper when we hear these hints of a story during deep canvassing, to uncover the actual story and, if possible, how that experience made them feel and why it made them feel that way. So we have, for folks who are going out to engage in deep conversation, whether that's at a door or during an event, or even maybe at the table during Thanksgiving, a cone of curiosity. And that cone of curiosity is our best guide for how to dig deeper when we hear the hint that there's a story. So it's kind of like a little step-by-step guide to unearthing the story and then digging into the feelings underneath it. So first, when someone's making a passing reference to something that sounds like a story, our first step is to stop and say, tell me more. And that signals that we're interested. And then we ask specific open-ended follow-up questions to pull more details out of the story. Well, who was it? How do you know them? What happened? When was this? Where was this? And just like we want to paint a picture for the voter when we're sharing our own stories, we want the voter to paint a picture of a moment in time in their life too, for us and for them. But we don't want to stop there. We then want to ask, how did that feel? Because number one, it's a mistake to assume we already know how they felt. And number two, it's important to get them to name their feelings and process them out loud if we can. They may not even have processed how something felt until now. And then we still want to go deeper and ask why, as in, why did you feel that way? Because if they're answering that question, they're probably talking about the emotional core of their internal conflict and the core of that cognitive dissonance that might help them understand what issues they're most powerfully impacting their lives right now that they maybe hadn't been challenged to think about, or persuade them on an issue that they thought they had one particular viewpoint or perspective on, but when they think about the folks in their lives that they know or the experiences they had, they realize that they're a little bit different perhaps. So this is just a quick graphic to show, so often in conversation, we ask one question and then we move on, and we're just digging we're digging like 7 1-foot holes, and we're not really getting to the meat of the issue. But if we use deep canvassing in conversations, whether it's at the door or really just in conversation, we can dig deeper and really get to the emotional lived experience that has brought someone to this moment. I'm running a little behind, and I want to make sure we still leave a lot of time for our breakout groups. So I'm just going to say, if you didn't attend the workshop last Thursday, there's going to be a recording for that. This is just a quick overview, but of course, storytelling is a part of deep canvassing. In that vulnerability, it's a back and forth, and your story can be really powerful and impactful when trying to connect or communicate with a voter or resident to help them understand why you're so passionate about being at that door to talk to them. I think the next big question is, does it work? And so if you read the article that we sent out in the Clarion, maybe you saw that a piece of information was, in 2016, candidates, political parties, and special interest groups spent a collective $6.4 billion on the federal election. Of course, this is several years ago at this point, but it's still incredibly relevant in terms of spending in elections. Following that election, 2 political scientists, Dave Brookman with Stanford University and Joshua Kalla, a doctoral student at UC Berkeley, analyzed data from 49 state, local, and federal campaigns to evaluate the effective persuasiveness of their campaign methods. And what they found was that whether it was a traditional TV ad, a mailer, a GOTV conversation, a billboard, the memorable interaction, the voting outcome was essentially non-existent, 0.03%. And even memorable interactions like a knock on a door tended to fade quickly from voters' memories and were generally forgotten by election day unless it happened within just a few days before election day. So, for example, they discovered that TV ads can be gone from someone's memory in just a week. Positive, negative, it can fall out of memory. However, they also studied deep canvassing. They've studied deep canvassing now in several different states on several different issues, and deep canvassing conversations show that the effect of that conversation lasts 36 weeks. And the real basic answer as to why what's really different is that the person who was canvassed through conversation was encouraged to come to their own conclusions and their own answers using their own life experience, and not being given a 3-minute elevator pitch about a specific issue that they probably do have a connection to, but they might not have realized how deep of a connection they have to it. So when we're having these deep canvas conversations in other states and other communities, we're seeing a 7% increase in persuasion on an issue with a lasting impact even 3, 6, and 9 months down the road. And for folks who are like, okay, but how many people are really going to talk to us? If we deep canvass, if I knocked on the door of my neighbor who I've brought brownies to, twice a year, maybe, are they really going to want to talk to me? The answer seems to be yes. So 78% of people who answered the door during one particular deep canvas study by these 2 political scientist individuals wanted to stay for the conversation. And then 75% of people who started a conversation shared a personal story of their own. And just quickly, I'll show you that, this one revolves around the government. These questions were worded very specifically for this canvas that happened. This was done through people's action. Should the government provide service or illegal immigrants healthcare coverage under a new program that would provide all Americans healthcare coverage, was the question through a deep canvas. And they were seeing 8 in every 100 conversations, a conversion rate. And even 4.5 months later, still keeping that number relatively converted. And when we look at what 8 percentage points can do, here's just a couple of examples from people's action at what 8 percentage points really looks like. But essentially in many of the major elections we've seen in the past few years, 8 percentage points is larger than any margin our candidates are seeing that determine a win or a loss. So 8 percentage points, while seemingly small, is actually incredibly large in the scheme of political campaigning. The last thing I just want to say is that lots of organizations have been doing this. It's been hard to find them, but we are, as an organization, Western Colorado Alliance is connected to many of them now. Steve DeLine with the New Conversation Initiative is going to be our keynote speaker on Saturday to talk about his experience knocking doors following Prop 8 all the way to where he is now with his own organization. The issues are going to vary. These are really hot, like, national issues that I used as examples, but the outcomes can remain the same or can be just as impactful, even if we identify our own issues. Maybe our issue here is affordable housing. Maybe it's access to good nutrition. Whatever our campaigns look like in our communities is really going to depend first on our ability to listen and connect. So the last thing that I want to do is just play this clip for you. I really hope that let me make sure that y'all can hear my sound. Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing just really quick and then start sharing again because I'm not very technologically capable. And so I want to make sure that I'm sharing everything for you. Okay. This is from a podcast, To See Each Other. George Gale, who is the director of People's Action, has been doing deep canvassing work in rural communities across the US, has put together a podcast of organizers on the ground who've been knocking doors. And this is just a short, quick story that highlights one of those experiences.
So deep canvassing, I think you would assume that people would feel put off by the stranger asking what it was like for them to be a single mom 20 years ago, or what it was like for them to have to make decisions to go to work instead of taking care of their kids when they were sick, or instead of taking their kids to the doctor, still sending them to school. Or you'd think that they would feel that a stranger should not be asking them those questions. But if you have the courage to ask, people, for the most part, are willing to tell you. And for a lot of people, it's a transformative experience because nobody's ever asked them questions like that. Not even their closest loved ones or best friends. The very first conversation we had as part of this project, we kind of had a script with this first door that we went to, but it was really a mess. We just knew we needed to ask questions to get to his story and what he was connecting with immigrants. So his name was Ed, and I had two volunteers with me, Susan and Zareth. And they were just going to observe. And I was scared shitless because I had no idea what I was doing. So we asked Ed, how do you feel about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is definitely and 0 is definitely not, and 5 is undecided? I'm a 10, Ed says. Okay. Well, what about if it included undocumented immigrants? He went off about how undocumented immigrants didn't deserve it and how that makes him want to put himself at a 0. I asked him if he knew any immigrants, and he didn't. Then I asked him, when's a time in his life when he's really needed care or support? And he started telling me about how he wasn't too happy with where his life was. Like, he's glad that he is where he is now in this trailer park in Oakland County, but he thought he was going to go a lot further. And he didn't, because instead he had struggled with addiction to the extent that he was incarcerated, that he was homeless for several years. And I just kept asking questions about that experience, about what happened and what it felt like, and what his relationship was to his family at that time. He shared about how his dad had been disappointed in him. And then he realized he did know an immigrant. His dad was an immigrant. His dad was an immigrant from England, and he worked in factories in England as a child and immigrated to the United States for a better life. And I kind of made the case to him that the immigrants coming over here and him have a lot more in common. This economy's hard and this world is hard, and they're just wanting to do what's best for their families. And he agreed. So by the end of the conversation, he'd changed his mind completely. That was the first conversation. It was incredible. I cried a little bit, like I was tearing up. And Susan and Zareth and I looked at each other afterwards, like wide eyes and like our heads kind of like shaking or nodding, like just incredulous, disbelief. It was just amazing. So deep canvassing.
There's my tech skills. Well, I want to get us into our breakout group and get us started in conversation with each other, but I'll just finish that I've like listened to that particular one 4 times now, and I think I get like shivers each time. We're gonna have some panelists on Thursday who come from really different backgrounds and perspectives, and I have been meeting with these panelists individually. Some of them who aren't able to join, so more than just the 4 who will be joining us. And it's been really challenging because I've been trying to intentionally meet with folks who I wouldn't probably have the opportunity to run into otherwise. And I don't want to say too much about the panelists that we'll hear from, because I hope you're available and planning to join, and if not, no worries. But I will say that I've met many of them for the first time, just in meeting them to ask if they'd be interested in being on the panel and talk a little bit more about it. And each one of them has offered vulnerability to the point that they've cried with me and allowed me to be vulnerable with them. And I've been able to understand more where they come from. I don't necessarily still agree with their own perspectives and outcomes, but my ability to understand and empathize with them means that we're going to be able to continue having conversations long beyond this panel on Thursday. And that's the most exciting opportunity that I've been able to have, I think, in a long while in organizing, is the ability to really talk to people who are not in my bubble and not like me. And is exactly what I think our community and our world needs right now. Before we can learn how to deep canvas, I want to challenge us to learn how to deep listen. And so this first activity is a deep listening activity. Oh, I'm sorry, I passed our timeline. I'm going to come back to this later and just get us into it. But I will send this out. It's pretty self-explanatory. And if I have time, I'll come back to it. I forgot I had these slides. I'm so sorry. Basically, we want to meet people where they are, at their doors, in their homes. We want to meet people who are never going to show up to one of our meetings because we're not engaging them in the right way, or we don't message the way that they would be interested in showing up, or they're busy, or they're working 2 jobs, or they're taking care of 3 kids, or whatever it is. We want to meet people where they are. We want to campaign on what they care about after talking to them. We want to campaign on those issues. And I think, a fabulous example is what the Uncompahgre Valley Alliance Association with Carol and the group in UVA is doing in Montrose is a really great example of asking and then working on an issue that will directly impact communities. We want to win on these improvements for people's lives. We want to deepen relationship within this organization. And then we want to make meaning together about the world. And that is the purpose of why we want to deep canvas and do that through deep listening, is we want to have more people in this conversation with us and in this work with us. And we want to be working on the right issues. So we need to find our intersections, and this for real is our first breakout. And this is what it's going to look like. Y'all are going to have, I'm going to say 3 minutes to introduce yourselves. And then facilitators are going to be in most of the rooms to help facilitate. And Nick, if you wouldn't mind, or Arn, either of you who has access to the micro, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link for the exercise into the chat now.
It's already in there.
Oh, thank you so much. See, not even looking. That's fabulous. Thank you. So if y'all want to click on that link, this is the document we're going to be working off of. It's a lot of words. It's not that scary because you're only going to choose three of those identifiers that really, really matter to you, that have an impact on your life. And then you're each going to take 2 minutes round robin style, however you'd like, to share your story on how each of these topics have shaped your life. And so if you've picked caring and fertility, religion, and age, then that's fine. And if someone else picked race, economic security, and age, that's wonderful too. Each of you just take 2 minutes to share your first topic, and then your second, and then your third. The goal is to hear from each other how your lived experiences have shaped your world perspective as you're living today, and not necessarily to respond. This is a deep listening exercise, not a deep canvassing exercise. So please feel free to share your stories. And if they intersect, that's fabulous. And if they don't, that's just fine too. But the goal is to really encourage us to hear perspectives, even from people we typically probably know in some ways, and we think we might know well, to help understand how we've come to this place, how we've come to this Zoom meeting in our lives, what has brought us there. So hopefully you all have access to the document. There's going to be facilitators and hopefully most of the groups to help assist with this. And I'm going to ask Nick to say if there's any questions. Are there any questions before we go off? Karen. No problem.
What are we supposed to do with this document? Bring it up after we're in the group?
Yes, when you're in the group, go ahead and bring it up.
Okay.
And you look at it individually. Take 3 minutes to find of the 8 in the list which you would like to share a story about. I will totally acknowledge that 2 minutes is not long enough for any story, but it's going to give us enough time to be in conversation today, hopefully. Okay.
Jerry, you still want 25 minutes on this?
Yes, let's do 22 minutes.
Okay, even better. All right. We good to go? Okay. Just real quick, Kevin Williams and Steve Allerton, you'll be kind of being facilitators for your group. And here we go.
Hello, welcome back. Can you all hear me okay? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? All right. Well, I love the looks on your faces. I'm sure that I've interrupted good conversation. So I apologize for that. I did want to just offer a few minutes of reflection if and I meant to say this before we jumped out into our breakout rooms, but I'll say this now, and that is, the one agreement I would ask that we all hold on to as we are in this space, and also as we move out of this space into our own worlds and lives, is just the agreement of what's learned here leaves here, but what's said here stays here. So that we can honor each other and really build that trust and respect with one another. But that being said, is there any takeaways that you all would like to reflect on, or just thoughts you would like to offer And yes, Elizabeth, I see your comment. This main piece is being recorded, so please no names and don't share other person's stories of what they shared themselves. But if you just have any reflections on how that felt to go through that exercise, did you learn anything that you were surprised about? Did you, in a room of people who are all connected to Western Colorado Alliance in some way or another, did you feel like you gained some insight or understanding into the way we really our own lived experiences really help us present in our world? I think those are more of the questions that I am just offering a moment of reflection on, if you'd like to offer it. If not, I am not asking. Feedback is not immediate or required for this particular piece.
Well, Jeriel, this is Charlie. I think one of the things I see and saw in my conversations was that it's all a journey as opposed to an end state. I mean, I used to always believe that it was all about, and unfortunately my kids heard me say this way too much, it's all about the W's. How many wins can you get? Are you winning every day? Are you making sure that you've won? In reality, it's all a journey. And sometimes my feelings was I missed out on understanding what people in lesser economic conditions, what were their stories? How did they get there? How would their lives be made better? And those are things that I've realized I've missed out on. And it was part of our conversation that we had, was missing out on those types of things, those types of stories.
Thanks for sharing, Charlie.
Gariel, I just want to highlight Kevin's question. Is anybody stuck, or do we have a group stuck in breakouts somehow?
It automatically kicks everyone out. So we might have lost a few people maybe, but I don't think that's possible.
Okay, just double checking.
The economic thing came up in ours too. Both from my perspective as a millennial who just has to work, dramatically longer hours than my folks did to build, even have a shot at building similar levels of wealth, that they as middle class people were able to have access to, and how that just drives so many of life's stressors and, how I see the world and my perception of where society is working and where it's not, and where our political system is working and where it's not, and things like that. And then we didn't really dig into this, but we also know quite a few folks now in their senior years who are trying to make ends meet out here, and the difficulties of that, and feeling like that's a pretty universal experience. And it's probably a gateway for a lot of people. It's probably one of the only spaces where people can instantly and perhaps comfortably converse outside of, or with a color scheme that's different from things like partisan, thinking or so it may be a major theme that we see.
Okay, I want to make sure I leave space for anyone who's maybe more nervous to come off of mute. And so is just waiting until that last possible moment, but I'm happy to move us on as well.
Jeriel, I would add that I think that the loss, that sense of loss that Charlie was talking about, I would just kind of put in there that I think that I think that loss is a part of the sickness in our culture, that we're not connected to people who are not like us. And I think that this deep canvassing offers us the opportunity to get into relationship with people as you've described. And that's good for the organization. It's also good for our souls.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be a misstatement if I said that, of course, Western Colorado Alliance isn't looking at this from a, you know, movement building perspective. How do we use deep canvassing as a tool to connect with others? But I truly feel that in our organization, the biggest motivator is the desire to connect with more people and to not just work on the issues we identify as the important issues, but really understand and be in our community and know where the needs are most deeply felt. So I absolutely hear you, Carol, and I think our organization will do a good job. I'm fairly confident. But I think the value that we as individuals will get out of it is going to be just as big, the impact. Okay, I'm going to jump back in because we do have one more exercise that I'd like to take us through. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. So that was a small exercise on finding intersections and active listening and, you know, seeking to understand maybe from a perspective we hadn't considered from our own lived experience. That's what we're going to be doing at the end of this year, beginning of next year. Our goal is to really be deep listening in the community, and really be in full swing in our communities, multiple, and really be in full swing by early summer, late spring, really late spring, early summer. And then as we get closer to the midterms, we want to use what we've learned in these conversations. And WCA is not planning to run any ballot issues. Maybe that will change. It won't be me, but what I can say is that, you know, Carol, in fact, who's on the call with us, has taken us through a visioning exercise as a board and helped encourage us to think about, as the midterms draw closer next year. Imagine during our annual conference, we filled the room with 500 people that were not all, you know, folks that we have currently engaged with. Who are we missing? What are the voices and the perspectives and the people that we are missing in our work, and how we can make an impact on issues? I'm very poorly summarizing this exercise that Carol did with us, but the main goal is to imagine that we had many more voices in the room, each coming because they had a need or a commitment from their own perspective. And what would that look like? And maybe there will be an issue on the ballot next year that we as an organization will say, we've heard this over and over and over again at the doors, we need to work on it, and we need to continue through deep canvassing. And maybe it will mean that we just continue to deep listen through the midterm. We're just not quite sure yet what it will look like, but we know that we need to be in far better communication and conversation and connection with folks in our community who don't even know this meeting exists this evening, right? Which is many of them. So this next exercise is on deep canvassing. It's shorter, and it's much more specific. So our scenario is going to be this story prompt, and I will copy and paste this story prompt into the chat so that you have it. But I want you to imagine that you are knocking your first door a year from now to speak with someone. You have no idea who's on the other side. Maybe you have the name of who they are, but you're not sure of their story or lived experience, surely. And we want to know, has there been a time when you experienced housing insecurity, whether it was access to affordable housing or livable housing? If no, what about a family member, a friend, or a community member that you witnessed? And encouraging that person to open up and share a story about a really particular thing that you're knocking on their door to talk about, and then asking them to be vulnerable and share more. What, when, where, what did that feel like for you? What did you think it felt? Why do you think it felt that way? Like I said, we've talked about some real big national issues in some of our examples earlier. We don't know what our issues are going to look like, but we know that we've heard affordable and livable housing come up over and over again in our conversations. So I'm using this as an example of something that we might have on the ballot next year. Could be an issue, could be something that comes up in the legislature. We're not sure. But this is the question, the prompt that I want to encourage you to ask. And this is how I'm hoping we can do it. So to practice that cone, so I want you each to take turns, 7 minutes each, setting your own timer on your phone for 7 minutes. And with a partner, I'd like you to take turns being the canvasser for 7 minutes and then being the resident or the voter for 7 minutes. And the canvasser, I'd like you to ask that prompt and practice that cone, really dig deeper, ask for details. How did that make you feel? Why? Let silence be an appropriate response, take breaths. And then as the resident and voter, be yourself. Don't make something up. Think about it. Be challenged to imagine if someone knocked on your door and asked you a specific question that challenged you to think deeply about this specific issue, what would you say? But don't give your entire story away, because now you know the rules of the game. So you know what the canvasser wants on the other end. Your challenge is just give little pieces. And this is really an exercise for when you are the canvasser, to understand, like, how do we engage with people to draw something more out in a story? So this is the prompt. 7 minutes each. Like I said, if you've got a phone, set a timer. If only one of you has a phone, maybe just set a timer for each of you. And I am going to stop sharing so that I can copy and paste that story into the chat for you all. That way you have access to it. Hold on one moment. Okay, so you should all have the prompt in the chat now. And Nick, I guess first I'll ask, are there any questions for this exercise?
Are we going to be assigned our role, whether we're the canvasser or the resident?
You're just going to take turns. So one of you offer to start as the canvasser. And if you got to flip a coin, I guess flip a coin. Okay, Nick, if you will take us out. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are over time, so I'm going to wrap us up real quickly, and I hope you were able to come to some conclusion on your conversations. If you'd like to put some reflections in the chat about how that experience was, I'd love to read through them later. And I'm so sorry we don't have time to debrief this at the moment. So I'm just going to share my screen one last time. I have one last slide for you, and that's it. And then we'll go ahead and get you out of here. And that is just that. Thank you for participating this evening. As I think we've tried to allude to over the past few workshops, as we're going to continue talking about on Thursday and on Saturday again, deep listening and deep canvassing are going to become a really big part of what we do in Western Colorado Alliance, at least over the next few years, as we engage in this cycle of really connecting in community. So upcoming still is this Thursday, Lines of Communication. It's again from 6:30 to 8. It's far less intensive. This is going to be a panel of diverse voices that we might not have had opportunity to hear from otherwise. So we're really excited to host them, really looking forward to the panel. We're going to ask some questions that you might ask at the door We're not going to be able to dig deep with them because we have a set of questions that we're going to ask. So if you're able to join, I just encourage you to think about the ways you would dig deep with them if you got to continue in conversation with these individuals who join us, and we'll send out a reminder for that. And then finally, our annual conference is this Saturday, the 14th. It begins at 9 a.m., but the keynote will be with Steve DeLine at 11, and you can read his bio here. And Arn, if you wouldn't mind dropping that evaluation link in the chat for folks who'd like to provide feedback on what you thought of this workshop, would really love to hear any thoughts. This is kind of the first time we've talked about deep canvassing in an outward perspective. I hope you're interested in learning more and participating and continuing the conversation with us. And otherwise, I am happy to stay on. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, I'll stay on for just a bit. But for those of you who are ready to jump off, please feel free to do so. And please click that evaluation link before you do, if you don't mind. And hopefully we'll see you Thursday and Saturday or some combination.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Woohoo.
Sorry, Jeriel, I don't know how to find the evaluation again.
Oh, in the chat, let me see. Oh, I have to stop sharing.
There's the link, right? Yeah. The giant link.
The giant link.
Okay, thanks.
It's going to be sent out with the slide deck as well.
Thank you, Jeriel. Good workshop.
Thanks. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Thank you all for attending. I will sign off and see you all at sometime soon.